Majora's Mask is the sequel to Ocarina of Time and the second 3D Zelda game. Although it uses the engine and mechanics of Ocarina, it's far from a derivative sequel. In this video, I'll be looking at the areas where Majora's Mask stands apart from Ocarina. I'll try to keep spoilers light, but there may be some spoilers for Majora's Mask, Link's Awakening, and Ocarina of Time. With that in mind, let's jump straight into the Evolution of Zelda, Majora's Mask. Majora's Mask released in April 2000, just over a year after Ocarina. An Iwata Asks article reveals that the game was originally intended as an alternate version of Ocarina. This is similar to how Link's Awakening was originally meant to be a port of A Link to the Past. This development time led to a lot of mechanics and assets being repurposed from Ocarina. The time loop concept came from a need to reduce the scope to a manageable level. In my opinion, the time loop gives the game its own identity that might have been missing if the game was a more straightforward sequel. Majora's Mask also uses the 4MB expansion pack, which allows for a variety of technical improvements. This game pushes the Nintendo 64 to its limits. Majora's Mask borrows a lot from Ocarina. At times it can feel like a standalone expansion rather than its own game. To avoid bloating this video, I'm not going to cover areas which haven't changed in detail. I'm assuming that you have at least a basic understanding of 3D Zelda gameplay. It seems that the developers probably thought the same thing, as this game tutorializes a lot less than Ocarina did. Many mechanics which were previously slowly introduced are brought back with little to no explanation. There's a lot of reused content in this game, not just visual assets, but also enemies, items, and puzzles. These usually return with some kind of twist. For example, there's a section where you chase a Deku in the same way that you chase Dampé in Ocarina. The Deku chase plays out similarly, but is much harder. Although a lot is reused from Ocarina, the game deviates in some major ways. If the game was less experimental, it could have ended up just being more Ocarina. Despite the amount of reused content, Majora's Mask is one of the most unique entries in the series. There are a lot of parallels to draw with Link's Awakening. Both Majora and Awakening are sequels to games which executed on their concept almost perfectly. Both games carve their own identity through tone and twists on the gameplay. There are also many superficial similarities between the two. Both games are set in places other than Hyrule. Both games are heavily driven by side content and NPCs. Both Majora's Mask and Link's Awakening feature owl statues, although they serve different purposes. There are also some clear story parallels that I won't go into as they involve heavy spoilers for Link's Awakening. The biggest change in Majora's Mask is the addition of the timer. The moon is falling. After 3 days it will crash into the world, obliterating everything. This cycle takes about an hour of real time and is a central mechanic that is impossible to ignore. You can manipulate the timer with songs, allowing you to slow the passage of time by 50% and to skip to dawn or dusk. You can also play the Song of Time to immediately go back in time and reset the cycle. Resetting time is not a failure state and is something you'll be doing regularly. When this happens, you lose most of your items and everything you've done in the world is reset. You do keep key items like masks and pieces of heart. Rupees can be stored in the bank to preserve them across resets. You'll need to plan your time carefully to make sure that you have enough time left in the cycle to finish whatever you're doing. If you have to reset time during a long quest chain or in the middle of a dungeon, you'll have to restart it from the beginning. Although the time pressure adds tension to the game, if you make sure to reset and slow down time before you start a long section, you'll find yourself with lots of time to spare. Outside of simply time pressure, many events will require you to be at the right place at the right time. If you miss them, you'll be locked out for the rest of the cycle. This system encourages you to pay close attention so that you don't miss a timed section of a quest, and there are many puzzles built around figuring out where to go at what time. It can be a bit annoying having to wait around until the right time to trigger an event, but this is a minor frustration. The timer can also result in you having to repeat content, but this is rare. The timer isn't just a tacked on mechanic. It completely defines the game. Even when not doing a time-sensitive event, you always have to plan around the time remaining in the cycle. Having time left at the end of a long quest provides a good excuse to explore. The main story of Majora's Mask isn't the focus. It's a classic Zelda setup where you need to get something from each of the main temples in order to save the world. The side quests, on the other hand, have some of the best writing in the series and are where the game really shines. Most of the side quests revolve around helping people with their problems. Some of these are just normal personal problems, but most of them revolve around two events: the upcoming carnival and the imminent destruction of Termina. Some side quests are short and simple, but some of the more intricate ones span the entire game. For example, the Don Gero side quest requires you to reunite a choir of 5 frogs, 2 of which are found in separate temples. The side quests vary from absurd, like defending a farm against aliens trying to abduct their cows, to some more grounded ones. Perhaps the most notable side quest in the game is the Kafei and Anju questline. This quest spans the whole 3 days, and starts with you looking for Kafei, who has gone missing. Throughout the quest you'll learn that Kafei and Anju were meant to marry, but Kafei's mask which he needs to present her has been stolen. Completing the quest requires triggering a complex set of events, and there are several points where you can fail, forcing you to restart from the beginning. The Kafei and Anju quest leads to my favourite moment in the game. When you finally reunite the pair, there is only 6 hours left until the moon will fall. It's a bittersweet ending. The two lovers are finally reunited, but facing destruction. It's tainted by the knowledge that you'll need to reset time, and that none of it will have ever happened. It would be a peaceful moment, if the ground wasn't shaking from the imminent impact. It's this strange, conflicting mix of feelings that runs throughout many of Majora's quests. At the beginning of the 3-day cycle, most of the NPCs don't even acknowledge the moon. By the night of the final day, the main hub is a ghost town. Every character reacts to the apocalypse a little bit differently. Some look to run, others just want to enjoy their last days alive, and some people seem to deny that it's a problem entirely. Witnessing all these people cope with their mortality and helping them in their final days gives everything more weight. Many of the side quests are given significantly more impact from the context of the game. The sense of impending doom runs throughout the entire game. Even when you do help people, you'll inevitably have to reset the world. There's simply not enough time to help everyone in a single cycle. The themes at play are more complex and interesting than anything the series has had so far. I believe that this is where Majora's Mask truly shines and sets itself apart from Ocarina. Majora's Mask has a unique tone. There's something surreal about the entire game. I don't think this was unintentional either. There's some things in this game which were definitely made to be creepy. An example that jumps out is the Happy Mask Salesman. Instead of animating smoothly like everyone else, he just jumps between key poses. Another example is how Link screams in horror when putting on a transformation mask. Majora's Mask is a weird game, and I think that's why it's gained a cult following. One of the biggest gameplay additions are the transformation masks. There are 3 main ones which give you access to new forms: the Deku, Goron and Zora masks. The Deku form can burrow into specific spots on the ground to jump out and glide into the air. The Goron form is strong, able to break rocks that would normally need bombing. It also has access to a rolling attack for fast movement and to jump off of ramps. The Zora form can swim and walk underwater. The masks do a lot for gameplay variety. They're way more engaging upgrades than just items. They're not just for puzzles and combat either. Some NPCs will interact with you differently depending on your mask. I think the masks are great additions, although I did find the Zora swimming to be a little bit clunky and sometimes frustrating. Each mask has a unique set of animations as well as its own instrument. I particularly like Deku Link's chest opening animation. He's too small to reach the bottom, so he has to jump in to retrieve the item. The transformations keep the gameplay varied without overshadowing the core mechanics. The world of Majora's Mask is entirely new, taking place in Termina rather than Hyrule. In the centre is Clock Town, a huge town with many sub-areas. Surrounding that is Termina Field, a hub that serves the same purpose as Hyrule Field. The real standout area is Clock Town. Every NPC in Clock Town has their own schedule and moves around throughout the cycle. This is impressive for the time and helps to make the town feel lived in. There's a lot to do in Clock Town, and a lot of side quests revolve around it. The size is big enough to have scale while not being awkward to navigate. It's a place where you'll spend a lot of time, and it does the job well. While it is far bigger than any of Ocarina's towns, Clock Town is the only notable town in the game. This is another example of the developers being smart with their time. Focusing on a single town creates a far more engaging playspace than if they had stretched themselves across more areas. Instead of having a song to teleport to each dungeon, there are owl statues around the world. After activating a statue, you can then teleport to it using the Song of Soaring. The fast travel is convenient, especially since you're constantly on a timer. The downside is that there's not much reason to revisit certain areas. Majora's Mask only has 4 full-length dungeons. The biggest change is the addition of stray fairies. Fairies are hidden throughout each dungeon. If you get all of them, you can take them back to a nearby fountain for a unique reward. These rewards aren't minor either. The Great Bay Temple, for example, gives you the double health upgrade from Ocarina. That's a massive reward for optional content. The fairies can be deviously hidden. Hunting down them all can be difficult and encourages careful exploration of each room within the dungeon. They are optional, but they're a lot of fun to track down. The difficulty and complexity of Majora's dungeons is about in line with Ocarina, although there are significantly less of them. There are several mini-dungeons in addition to the main ones. I particularly liked the optional sculptular houses. These are mini-dungeons with a large number of golden sculptures hidden inside. If you find all of them, you'll get a reward. These are a lot of fun, and some of my favourite optional content. The mini-dungeons are still long enough to be satisfying, although they tend to be less complex than the full-blown temples. The dungeons are on par with the best in Ocarina. The Stone Tower Temple stands out. Its unique concept and great pacing make it my favourite 3D dungeon so far. The only thing that brings it down is the need to switch between masks often. This leads to a lot of time wasted in menus. One criticism I've heard about this game is that the timer can make players feel rushed while exploring dungeons. I personally found that with the inverse Song of Time, the 2 hours you get was comfortably enough to clear every dungeon. I think the only dungeon so far in the series it wouldn't be long enough to clear would be the Ocarina of Time Water Temple. It's worth noting though that I have been playing all of these games in a short span of time, so I'm well practiced with the dungeon mechanics. One area which I'm not going to cover much is the combat. It's almost unchanged from Ocarina. I found the combat in this game to be easy. The combat probably isn't any easier than Ocarina, but having played Ocarina directly before, I was already used to it. The bosses are another aspect of Majora's Mask that I don't have a lot to comment on. There are some cool concepts here, especially Twin Mold, but overall, none of them left a lasting impression. They're not bad boss fights, but in my opinion, none of them are on the level of fights like Phantom Ganon or Bongo Bongo. Visually, Majora's Mask is a direct improvement to Ocarina. In the Ocarina video, I called out the low-resolution textures and 2D interiors as particularly bad looking. This game has fully 3D interiors, and while the textures are still low resolution, they're a lot better across the board. Link has also been given some improved animations, especially for jumping. Most of the animations which looked stiff in Ocarina have been polished. It's clear that the team has grown more experienced working with the engine. The extra memory from the expansion pack probably helped as well. I'm not going to pretend this game isn't visually dated, but it still feels easier on the eyes than Ocarina did. As you'd expect from Koji Kondo, the soundtrack is fantastic. It's a mix of old songs and entirely new ones. Themes like Majoras and the Giants work well with the darker tone of the game. In the final hours of the last day, the music changes to a theme that's slow and brooding. They could have made the final hours music tense, but making it more ambient works so much better. The music, combined with the earthquakes, are key factors in what makes the final hours so unique. I talked about how reuniting Anju and Kafei was my favourite moment in the game. It's such a complex moment that you rarely see in games, especially of this age. I think a lot of that feeling was driven by the soundtrack. Majora's Mask is a bold game. Although at first it seemed like it was going to be too similar to Ocarina, I ended up loving it for entirely different reasons. For a while, it did feel like more Ocarina, but after doing some side quests and immersing myself in the atmosphere, the game clicked for me. It's hard to say that this game is better than Ocarina when it leans on its mechanics so much, but it manages to have its own identity as well. While I think Ocarina's core gameplay experience is overall better, Majora's Mask was unlike any other game in the series. I loved this game, although I don't think it will click with everyone that plays it. I'd still recommend playing Ocarina first, but Majora's Mask has earned its place in the series. This game could have easily been a forgettable sequel to Ocarina, but instead, it's a more experimental game that has its own identity. In the next episode of the Evolution of Zelda, it's back to the Game Boy for Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons. I'm not yet sure which to play first, and whether there'll be two separate videos, or if I'll combine them into one. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Evolution of Zelda.